Imagine a democracy so focused on survival that it actually writes a kind of self-destruct button right into its own constitution. Or maybe it's more of a reset switch. It's a mechanism that lets the government totally change its only structure, giving itself huge, almost absolute power, all in the name of saving the nation. That's the wild and, let's be honest, kind of scary world of India's emergency powers. And really, that's the big question, isn't it? When you're faced with a war, a rebellion, or some other huge crisis, how does a system that's built on individual freedoms and shared power protect itself without becoming the very thing it's fighting against? Well, India's answer is a set of constitutional tools that are, frankly, both brilliant and incredibly dangerous. So let's dive in and see exactly what they are and how they work.
So here's the core concept. Normally, India is a federal country, powers shared between the central government and the states. But these emergency provisions, they're like a giant switch. When you flip it, the whole system transforms. The central government becomes all-powerful, and the states basically have to follow its lead. It's a temporary constitutional power-up designed to handle a crisis that a divided government just couldn't.
Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, here's our game plan. We're going to break it down into 5 parts. First, we'll look at why this power is both necessary and, really dangerous. Then we'll dig into the different types of emergencies, from the big one, the national emergency, to the super controversial state emergency. We'll also see how the courts have pushed back against its misuse. And finally, we'll bring it all together to look at the delicate balance of it all. All right, first up, let's get into this central conflict. These powers are a total double-edged sword. They're designed to save the country, but they have the potential to seriously damage its democratic heart. You see, the key thing to get is that this was a deliberate choice. The people who wrote the Constitution knew that in an extreme situation, like a massive war, you need one unified command. You can't have 28 different states all running in different directions, right? It would be chaos. So they built this in. It's a feature, not a bug. But the risk, and it's a huge one, is what happens if a government decides to invent a crisis just to grab more power. That's the danger that hangs over this whole topic. Okay, now for the most powerful tool in the entire box, the national emergency under Article 352. This is the big one. This is the one that can change everything, right down to your most basic fundamental rights. So, a national emergency can only be declared for 3 very specific reasons: war, external aggression, or armed rebellion. Now, that last one is really interesting. It used to just say internal disturbance, which, as you can imagine, is super vague and was used pretty controversially back in the 70s. So to stop that from ever happening again, the 44th Amendment changed it to armed rebellion, a much, much higher bar to clear. And they also made sure it's not easy to declare one. The president can't just wake up and decide to do it. First, they need a written recommendation from the entire cabinet, not just the prime minister. Then Parliament has to approve it, both houses, with what's called a special majority, which is a tough vote to win, all within 1 month. These are serious hurdles put there on purpose. Right. This is where it gets real for everybody. Once a national emergency is declared, what happens to those fundamental rights that are supposed to be the bedrock of democracy in India? This table breaks it down perfectly. You've got 2 different things that can happen. Under Article 358, if the emergency is because of a war, your Article 19 rights, like freedom of speech, get automatically suspended. Poof, gone for the duration. But under Article 359, the president can suspend your ability to go to court to enforce your other rights. See the difference? One is the right itself getting suspended, the other is your ability to fight for it in court. It's a subtle but massive distinction. And here is the single most important protection you have. Thanks to that same 44th Amendment, it doesn't matter how bad the emergency is, 2 of your rights are absolutely sacred. Article 20, which protects you from unfair conviction, and Article 21, your right to life. The government can never, ever take those away. Period. So, who makes sure these rules are followed? The Supreme Court. In a huge case called Minerva Mills, the court basically drew a line in the sand. It established that it has the power of judicial review. It can actually look at the government's reasons for declaring an emergency and can strike it down if it thinks those reasons are bogus. The court is the ultimate referee. All right, let's switch gears now to the emergency power that's been used the most and honestly has caused the most political fights: President's Rule, also known as state emergency under Article 356.
The idea here is that if a state government just can't function according to the Constitution, maybe law and order has totally collapsed or there's a political stalemate and no one can form a government, the central government can step in, dismiss the elected state leaders, and run the state directly from the capital. But, and this is a big but, this power has been a source of endless controversy. For decades, central governments were accused of using it as a political sledgehammer to get rid of state governments run by opposition parties. Even back in 1987, the Sarkaria Commission was warning everyone that this was supposed to be a measure of last resort, not a political toy. All of this misuse eventually led to a major constitutional showdown, and in this fight, it was the Supreme Court that stepped into the ring to lay down some new ground rules. The entire game changed because of one single case, S.R. Bommai v. Union of India. You have to remember that name. This judgment is one of the most important in India's history because it put some serious chains on the central government's power to just fire a state government. The court laid down some game-changing rules. First, it said judicial review is absolute. The government has to show its work. It can't just hide behind excuses. Second, and this one is huge, the court said the only place you can test if a government has a majority is on the floor of the assembly with a vote, not in some governor's private opinion. And third, the center has to provide actual, material evidence to justify what it's doing. And they didn't stop there. The court ruled that you can't just dissolve the state assembly right away. It can only be suspended until Parliament gives its okay. And here's the real kicker. If the court finds the whole thing was unconstitutional, it has the power to bring the old government back to life. It can literally restore them to power. The court also added this fascinating point that since secularism is a basic part of the Constitution, a state government acting against it could be dismissed.
So, after all these fights between the government and the courts, where do we stand today? Let's bring it all together and see the big picture.
Now, before we summarize, I should mention there's one more type, the financial emergency. This could be declared if the whole financial system of India is at risk. It would give the center incredible power, like cutting the salaries of all government employees, including judges. But the most amazing fact about it, in over 70 years, it has never, ever been used. This table is the perfect cheat sheet. It puts everything we've talked about right next to each other. You can see the national emergency is the only one that messes with your fundamental rights. The state emergency is all about a breakdown of government in one state, and the financial emergency is the economic panic button that's never been pushed. Notice how they all have different rules for approval and how long they can last? It's a complex system, but it's designed with a lot of thought. At the end of the day, the story of these powers isn't static. It's always evolving. It's a constant push and pull, a tug of war between the government's need to act decisively in a crisis and the court's job to protect the rights of every single citizen. It's a system that's always being tested and argued over. Which leaves us with the final question, really. Are these powers a necessary evil? An essential tool that a country as vast and complex as India just has to have in its back pocket? Or are they a fundamental flaw in the Constitution? A loaded gun that, no matter how many safety locks you put on it, will always be a threat to freedom? That's the debate that's still going on today.